Hello and welcome to the Shadow Chronicles, the podcast where we take a deep dive into the inner work, generational trauma and your shadows. Having the hard conversations so you don't have to. You know, the shit that doesn't get talked about. My name is Sky. I'm a shadow integration specialist and I'm here to guide you so you can unfuck yourself by doing the shadow work, healing the generational trauma so you can vibrate with confidence and fucking enjoy your life. And my co-host
is Todd. I am an integrative health coach who helps people own more of who they are and change their lives on many different levels to become who they really are. Find your compass and follow it, to say it simply.
Hello and welcome to episode 3. What is the shadow? What is the dark shadow? What is the light shadow?
I imagine superficially those sound like oxymorons, don't they?
Just a little bit.
So what's a light shadow? Well, shade.
Shade, smoke, yeah. I don't know. Fog, mist.
Anyway, we're going to talk about that. Sky, what is the shadow?
Well, the shadow, essentially in the easiest way that I could possibly explain it for you guys, is all the parts of yourself that you have disowned, disliked and rejected and put them into the background. I think Debbie Ford actually said this really beautiful in her book. And if you can picture who you are as a mansion and behind each door in a different room is a different part of you. And through conditioning, whether it be values, religion, whether it be trauma, whether it would be abuse, that you have been taught that some of those traits or aspects were wrong or bad or socially unacceptable, you close and barricade those doors off. They never actually go away. They're still there behind those barricaded doors, those traits. They just go into the darkness.
Pretended like they're not there anymore. They're not part of you. I've ignored that sufficiently, so that's not me.
Exactly. So they go into the darkness. And the light shadow, mist or the fog, however you want to picture it, is more of the same, but more on those positive traits. The confidence.
Or the not wanting to own the confidence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah? Not wanting to own confidence or, when you look at somebody, and I'll go into how to identify in just a second, but when you look at somebody and be like, oh, I'll be more successful if I was more like that person, you are seeing them in light, not in darkness. But you are also seeing them as lesser, you're seeing yourself as lesser than that person.
It's almost like there's that spotlight on them in that like immediate circle of the spotlight while you're still in the darkness looking at them in the spotlight on the stage, so to speak.
Yes, exactly. And it's like a point of inspiration or admiration. I wish I could be like that. So that's the same. You've shut the door on that part of yourself for the same, whatever reason, conditioning, limiting or negative beliefs about yourself, trauma.
Things that you think or feel that you don't think are socially acceptable.
Definitely, yeah. And when I say, when you look at someone and you admire them and be like, oh, I wish I could be like that, I say that is because one of the core identifiers of your shadow is those people around you. So, as I said, you are a mansion and all these rooms are all these different parts and you've closed off and barricaded doors to certain parts. That's essentially saying that you are all things and all things of you. So you have all and a wide range of emotions. You have all and a wide range of behaviours. You have all and a wide range of personality traits and all of the things. You see what you have disconnected in other people, within yourself, within other people, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So that is essentially the shadow.
I think like that example you just gave then, that was my first experience with what the shadow was described as, is that you see someone that you just hate. You don't even know them, but for some reason on a very subconscious level, they've just triggered something within you that just leaves you to detest them. But what it ultimately boils down to is that they've shown you something that you actually don't like about yourself, that you're not being present with, that this person is just a convenient mirror and avatar for those elements.
Definitely. And that's the thing as well. Your shadow will show up in your life in some way, shape or form. Whether that's just what you've said, Todd, they will show up as another person acting as a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
They will show up in, violent emotional outbursts, or you'll be literally repeating loops with relationships, with friendships, with family, all of the things, until you can see that these people are coming in, these outbursts are happening because you are hiding away something that is wanting to be seen and heard. And until you, as you said, become present with that and actually sit in that uncomfortable space of like, what does this actually mean? It's going to keep happening.
So the analogy being that you, at least at some point, have consciously suppressed bits of yourself, bits of your life experience, all of the above, that on a conscious level has effectively created a blind spot for behaviours, patterns, thoughts, feelings, all of the above, that are still always there because it's a part of you, sucked in. It's just how it is. But because on that conscious level you do not acknowledge them, because you're not aware of your part that's being played out in these conversations, that's when you outsource it all, effectively.
Effectively, unconsciously, you kind of outsource it. Your nervous system, your unconscious, your brain even, it seeks to create balance. And what you have disconnected the counter opposite part of that, and I will get that into, like, really dive into that into the next episode, but the counter opposite part will over exaggerate.
So that's it's probably more of an ego conversation at that point, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that ego used to self-identify doesn't want to identify as this, and this.
Yeah.
And it will
only identify as that, and that.
And that ultimately is a self-defense mechanism. It's like, I don't want to think of myself as this kind of person or that kind of person who does this and this. Yeah. So you will like overcorrect out the other side.
Yeah, most definitely. The pendulum swung the whole ass other direction. Yeah. But what will happen, as you just said, you'll have mirrors show up in your life that are showing the parts of you that you don't want to identify with, but they will also be showing up with those parts as a massive overcorrection because they have also disconnected the parts that you are overcorrecting with. So that's how both, like if we're talking about two people, that's how both those parties come together. Yeah. Is because they're both a mirror for each other. And that's going to be a way conversation on relationships and, what we'd call narcissists or conditioned empaths and stuff like that, which is, a whole other episode.
And would it then be fair to say that even without that mirrored reflection, the overcorrection to completely avoid those things in the shadow, that's effectively toxic positivity?
Yes, most definitely. So you will hear a lot within the spiritual realm or the spiritual world about everything's all love and light and fluffy and, all of that shit. And
what's that basic white girl thing that not eat, pray, love, live, laugh, love, or something like that, right?
Something like that.
Yeah.
But, you know, what that can be, and this is just a generalization because I know it doesn't, you know, it's not everyone out there, but what that can be is, again, a massive rejection of anything, you know, negative. And I say that within quotation marks because, you know, when you have negative feelings, when you have negative emotions, and you get told by the spiritual community that, oh no, you can't have that. You only should love, and you only have positivity, and you know, only have gratitude, and you then automatically think that there's something wrong with you, right? Because a part of the human experience, because we're all amazing human beings with the capacity to feel and feel everything and deeply, is that you then have to shut off a whole half of yourself in order to be accepted.
It's avoidance.
Again, yeah, that's it. You're smushing it down, you're repressing again. You know, you may be repressing something due to your upbringing, and then you go on a healing journey or a personal development journey, whatever that looks like for you, and then you get told that you only should ever have gratitude and you should only love and all of this sort of stuff. And yes, everything comes back to love. But if you are not identifying or even holding space for the stuff that is like socially known as negative, you are overcorrecting, and that you can only overcorrect or suppress for a period of time before everything comes bubbling up and you kind of just go boom.
Well, what I feel like you're describing now is ultimately shadow work.
Yes.
It's the ability to embrace and have gratitude for the shitty stuff that is integral and essential in formulating the whole of you, rather than just this one half of the yin yang conversation.
Yeah, most definitely.
Because if you don't have the other half, then where's the actual value in the yin? And that's what shadow work is. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's literally, you know, and a lot of the time shadow work is diving into the darkness to bring it into the light, you know. And I also like to describe shadow work as literally the ultimate form of self-love, because how can you love yourself more if you're not actually addressing all of you as a whole?
If you're only liking half bits and chunks of you,
yeah,
it's not really that embracing of that.
No.
That fullness, let alone loving yourself.
Exactly, that's it. And a lot of the clients that I work with who even struggle, like, you know, they're on their healing journey, they're breaking the cycle, they're, you know, pretty much trying to move through their shit so they can become the best versions of themselves. And a lot of times they will struggle with things like gratitude and stuff like that, because they're like in that pit of, you know, hurt and grief.
Why would I deserve to have gratitude or positive feelings if this is what I'm realizing about myself, like I'm a massive piece of shit or whatever it happens to frame yourself in your own head as?
Yeah. And something I like to do is, again, like as you said with the yin yang, balance it out. You don't have to have all of the things that you're grateful for. You're allowed to say the shit that pisses you off. You know, oh my God, that fucking pissed me off today, but I learned a really cool lesson out of that, and for that I'm grateful.
If you're not acknowledging those things, how do you process those things? If you don't process those things, how do you come out the other side of them? How do you appreciate them for what they are? How do you have gratitude for them if they're not embraced on one way or another? Hopefully it's your decision to do that, as opposed to the universe making you. But
I know, right? Because that's it. We will all get signs from the universe, which I'm pretty sure we touched on in what is inner work. Is the universe...
Yeah, we touched on a lot of stuff in inner work. That sounded creepier than it needed to.
You know, the universe will give you a sign, and if you don't listen, the universe will give you a tap, and if you still don't listen, the universe will give you a bump, and if you still don't listen, it'll fucking knock you on your butt. You'll be like literally sinking, and you know, if that's your version of rock bottom and that's what you need to do to come out of that, then that's what you need to do. Yeah.
I mean, you know, and ideally you don't just end up being resentful of the universe at that point, because it's not going to work out for you either.
No. Unfortunately, no. But a lot of the times as well, is like the pain of staying the same must be great. So the pain of staying the same must outweigh the pain of change for change to occur. You know, doing this work, diving into the shadow, breaking the cycle, healing, transforming yourself, personal development, however you want to, like, you know, dress it up. It's hard. It's hard work, you know, and you have to be willing to do that hard work.
Would you say that it's hard because this is probably an ego conversation again? It's like the ego just wants to run the default programming because it's easier?
100%. When you are in a space for a period of time, you know, whether that's childhood, whether that's a relationship, whether that's, you know, your life essentially, when you've been running the same systems, the same patterns, the same whatever for a period of time, that becomes normal. Yeah. Even if normal is not good, even if normal is not safe, even if normal is not healthy.
At least it's familiar.
That's it. It's normal. And it, like, essentially it's why a lot of people that grow up in abusive households will then go into abusive relationships because it's normal.
Yeah.
In quotation marks. It's
normal for your neurology and normal for your feeling state.
Exactly.
Sometimes those are the same thing.
And
often those
it's familiar, you know what's going to happen, those sort of things. Yeah. Now, when you go to create change and you hit that light bulb and you go, you know what, I can't do this anymore, I'm done. Whatever your realization is, it's time to change. Your ego will throw a tantrum because it's like, well, change is unknown.
Predictable shitty is better than unknown possible.
According to your ego, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's going to go no, and it's going to throw everything it can at you. It's going to throw all your shadows. It's going to throw all of your negative beliefs. It's going to throw every fucking thing that it has at you to try and keep you in the same space.
It knows where to stick the knife in.
Right. Yeah, it knows where to stick the knife in. And it becomes hard then because you have that inner battle of, like, listening to what is coming up and sitting with that uncomfortable shit.
And
then deciding to go, well, I'm still going to do something different anyway.
Yeah. Well, I was about to say, and then, you know, there's that odd person. I say odd, no, most of them. Where the ego gets them out the other side as well. So they're doing all this work, and then there's, but what if she doesn't like him anyway? Oh, aren't you tired? Aren't you this? Aren't you that? Sort of thing. It's almost like trying to be placatory as opposed to mean to yourself. The irony being that leaves you in that same place.
Yeah. That's it. And a lot of that placation is like, what if she doesn't like you, or what if he doesn't like you anyway?
Yeah.
You know, that's when you have to have a conversation with yourself where it's like, well, why are you doing this? Are you doing this for yourself, or you're doing this out of the hopes that someone else will like you?
Yeah.
Because if you're doing it out of the hopes that someone else will like you, you're going to end up in the same fucking space.
Well, we'll probably end up doing an episode on, like, your relationship with your goals as an example. Like, if your relationship with your goals is not a particularly healthily made one, it kind of drives you, even though it's better, you're doing better things for yourself, it sort of cheapens those processes because you're still aiming at something that's not you.
Yeah.
Which kind of leaves you in the same space, but maybe more exhausted for putting in all that effort.
Yeah, definitely.
Bit more ego, right?
Bit more ego. And, you know, I guess essentially your ego is why, like, your shadow is the dumping ground for all of the bad shit, all of the nasty shit, all of the, you know.
Well, it was Jung who suggested that the way he broke down the psyche was that your persona is the bit that you show everyone. The ego is the bit that thinks that's who you think you are. And then you've got your unconscious, your subconscious, however you want to frame it, which is all the other background stuff going on. And then in the back little corner, that's where the shadow sits. And everything's interconnected to one another. It's just that what you're conscious of, I have an opinion that your consciousness is your ego in the same way that your ego is your consciousness.
Yep.
That's just what you think with. I won't go into too many details. We've had enough of tangents and we're only in episode 3.
Yeah, right.
But sort of recognizing that that's a thing is probably the first step. So when we were talking about inner work in the previous episode, that first step of self-awareness and the ownership that this isn't what I want, this isn't serving me, is ultimately the first step, yeah?
Yeah, definitely. And I like, how you frame when you work with people, it's that question like, well, who are you? Or like, who do you want to be? And what does that look like, feel like, sound like to you? And you find all of the parts that you want to be that you're thinking that you're not.
Well,
and then you have a look at that and be like, well, why am I not those things?
Yeah. Often when I ask those questions, it's rare that someone has an answer. Right. But it's asking the question to sort of at least start the speculation so that you can at least go, well, I know what I'm not, and it's satisfied with this bullshit anymore.
Yeah.
And at least that lends you to an opportunity to frame what you don't want, which helps you progressively refine what you do want.
And I know, I don't know about you, but I know a lot of people that I work with when I ask that question too. And a lot of the answer that I get is, well, I want to be my best self, or I want to be my true authentic self. And that leads then the follow-up question, well, what does that look like? Who does your true authentic self look like? And they will rattle off like, confidence, or, not caring what other people think of them, like lose the fear of judgment, right? Yeah. Being able to place boundaries down, being able to recognize red flags, being able to, all of those sort of things. And as I mentioned, like the beautiful human being that you are and I am is all things. It's a process of removing those masks and accepting all of the things that you are and all of the things that will come, so like one of the key things I get a lot of my clients to do when starting their shadow journey is to have a look at who are they judging or criticizing, and who are they pedestaling.
I know a lot of the times when I ask the question, who are you? That's kind of what it boils down to. So more often than not, like I use superheroes as a metaphor, whether it's aspirational or affirmational, but it ends up being a case of like, well, you have clues. And it's being present with what that means, what that looks like, who those clues are. So like, who are you gauging yourself on, either who you are or who you're not, or who you want to be more of, sort of thing. Because at least then there's some kind of framing. You can sort of almost triangulate that. You can almost reverse engineer that into, well, this is how I feel about what I'm seeing in that person or what I'm not seeing in myself.
Yeah.
And that's the depth of self-awareness you need to get to before any kind of integration and how those things got there in the fucking first place are a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And that's it. So, yeah, like as you said, like who do you inspire, or, all that stuff. Like I use the term model as well. So like a lot of the times it's, especially when we're talking like golden shadow, well, who do you want to model, or who, really inspires you, and all that sort of stuff. And you can then sort of look at that person, whether, you know, and be able to find those traits, those attributes, and like, as we said with inner work, practice.
Yeah.
Practice modeling that.
What does the person you're looking at tell you about yourself, and what does the person you despise tell you about yourself?
Right. So it's like where you are overly critical and judgmental. So when you're looking at someone or you have an opinion, like you said, like when you meet someone and all of a sudden you just like fucking hate them and you have no idea why. And
you kind of really do. You just don't know why you know why.
Right.
Yeah, because I speak English.
Technical term, is being able to, like look at where you criticize others or even criticize yourself. You know, look at where you criticize or look where you place judgment, look where you place blame, you know, all of those sort of things. Like, you know, oh, I don't like that person because she's XYZ, or I don't like him because he's that, you know. And when you can start to see specific traits about a person that really trigger or disturb you, because it's a disturbance, right?
Well, it's like I said, they're clues. They're things that tell you something that you need to be. Like we were talking about this with the inner work stuff the other day. It's like your emotions are clues, signposts, instructions almost.
Yeah.
If you're not paying attention to them, well, you're in for a long one.
Right? That's it. So what does that say about you? You know, where is that part of you that you have disconnected that is now showing up in the other person? You know, and having a look and being able to go, well, what would happen if I did accept and integrate this part, this self, because shadow comes in all shapes and sizes because it's shadow, right? What would happen if you did actually accept love and integrate that back into yourself?
Well, you were talking before about like you had those clients who said, "I want, you know, what would your best self actually look like? Oh, I'd be more confident. I'd be more authentic." It's like you know, the authenticness is probably, I would argue, quite central to that, in that it's got to be your version of those things as well. Right. And that's a big part of like recognizing that you are all of these things all at the same time. I usually say you're all of them and none of them, in that you're all of them, but you're none of them specifically until your ego tells you you are, because you're all of those things intermixed and intermingled in every decision, in every breath, in every moment. Yeah. Where was I going with that? but it's like if you want to be authentic, all of those other things that person might have said kind of almost stem from that. And I'd argue that authenticity comes from knowing yourself with that self-awareness, with that ability to go, well, this is a part of me. I've separated myself from it for a long time, but it's there for a reason. Like, why do I feel anger? It's there to
tell you something.
Get shit done.
Right.
But outsourcing it means that you're not being authentic.
No.
How do you have confidence if you're not present with all of the parts of you, assuming you could ever know all of you? Because that's a thing that humans are capable of.
We are layers. Shrek taught us a lot. We're like onions.
So did Kung Fu Panda.
Hey, my kids watched that this morning.
Yeah, there is no secret ingredient. Yeah, it's all you.
It's all you. Gotta go find chi. It's all you. Yep, gotta love that. But yeah, that's it. It's being able to be present with all of it and knowing that all of those things that you dislike so much in other people, you have within yourself, but they are there for a reason. As you said, Todd, like anger, it's there to get shit done. And we'll dive a lot on emotions and shadow in the next episode. But if you were shutting that down, well, how can you then show up in your lighter self, like your confidence or, your belief in your worth? How can you show up in those things if you don't have that flame?
Jordan Peterson refers to it as the monster that everyone has within them. Like,
oh, yeah.
So, we could sort of go into a biblical references and all this sort of stuff. And it's like the meek shall inherit the earth. And it's like, well, apparently that's not a great translation. A more accurate one would be, those who have swords but choose not to draw them shall inherit the earth. And it's that idea that all of those shadowy bits that you wish weren't there are necessary to make you the complete, engaged, loving, but ultimately formidable being that you actually are. That you can't be without them.
That's it. Well, how do you stop people from manipulating
you? How do you set a boundary if you're not prepared to stand there and say no and enforce that with some kind of intention so that the person on the other side goes, you meant that shit.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Like doing that again.
That's it. Like, as you said, how do you place it? How do you not be manipulated? How do you then, like as my client said, how do you then see the red flags if you are, you know, not aware enough to understand what that behavior means and go, okay, well, what does that, you know?
You said it a little while ago, it's practice.
You know, we practice that.
Sort of the practice being present with yourself in that moment to go, something's coming up for me. Because I can feel the similar sort of beat to me ending up manipulated and really pissed off about it.
Yeah. But then if you are not willing to sort of show up in more of those, like, negative in quotation marks, like as you said, say that with a bit of intention and a bit of assertiveness and go, well, hang on a minute, if I, you know, do this, then I'm going to end up, you know, wrung out and, you know, strung up and hung out to dry.
Been there, done that, was miserable, over it.
No fucking shit, right?
Yeah.
Like, how can you then go, well, I want to be my true authentic self, but, oh no, I can't do that because that means I'm a bad person. Fuck no.
Well, what you said it a little while ago, it's like, well, all of those things that would otherwise be labeled as a bad person is usually other people convincing you that you need to toe their line. And part of, even I'd argue the most essential part of shadow work is figuring out your line. What do you want?
Exactly. And I think we had a conversation about this at the gym the other day. And it was like, I think we were talking about relationships and boundaries and stuff like that. And like as you said, like, what do you want? Like, what are your non-negotiables? Yeah. What are your boundaries?
What's set in stone? What's hard no? What's soft no? What could be conversed about?
Right. And actually being, you know, having that space to show up as that person to say, well, I'm not putting up with that, or that's a hard no, or look, I can understand where you're coming from. That's not my intention. Let's sit down and discuss.
And that's a level of authenticity that I think most people, when they bring that word up, actually mean.
Right.
But also being prepared to be secure enough in and of yourself to know that, because you know you've got your own back, because you've built that resilience, you've built that strength, you've built that self-awareness on the back of that, that at some point maybe you can compromise, maybe you can negotiate, because ultimately you know you're going to be fine, and you know that if it ever crosses a certain line, you've got that covered too.
Yeah, exactly. And then, but also, like as you said, that enough of that self-awareness, enough of that inner work, enough of that integration, you know, done to know who you are, to also know that when someone comes to you and says, hey, I'm not happy, or hey, this is triggering me, you know, because again, all relationships are designed to trigger, and that, again, what do we want, 45 minutes or 3 hours?
What was it? The quote I always got was, your partner is there to show you where you need to heal.
So you need to also be secure enough to show up in that space and hold that space to go, oh, okay, I can see where you're coming from with that. As I said, not my intention. Let's discuss and hold space so you both can like grow, evolve, heal. And that's obviously if you're doing this sort of work within relationships, but also if you're doing this sort of work on your own, be prepared for it in your relationship, because you can do a hell of a fucking lot on your own, but that next layer will be waiting for you.
Without the litmus test that is your most favorite person, in theory. it's difficult to know what you will and won't compromise on until you're presented. And then this is practice 101 again.
Yeah.
It's like everything you just said kind of is why I start with, who are you? Because if you don't have that as some sort of fundamental bedrock by which you launch everything else about you and the rest of your life, it's like building on sand. Stuff's going to get a bit skewed and cracked and frayed at the edges, and
some kid's going to run past and kick it for you.
And then you're in a big mushy pile of sand anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's it. And I guess same but different, but I tend to start with like, what do you want? You know, and then build out from there. So that is essentially the easiest and wee tangent way to describe shadow. And how to get started.
I was about to say, and having how to start some shadow work.
Right, definitely.
Because we've kind of short coursed the integration element of what you do, which is shadow integration specialist.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you get specialized at what the shadow looks like and how to integrate that. You got to be able to put a finger on it first.
Definitely. And that's it. And just before we finish up, I had a client today who we did our first shadow integration together. And that's the thing, when I work with people, I work together. It's like I'm with them on their journey. I'm not like, hey, you go do that and I'll come check on you later.
See you in 2 weeks. This is your homework.
Right. No, I'm there with them. And like, as you said, like the shadow, all parts of you are there for a reason. They're there to help support you in your life in some way or another. So when we look at the shadow and when we look at those parts that you've closed the door and barricaded up,
or overcorrected to over invest in,
right? It's to then sit there and ask yourself, well, why are you here? Because we did a person, so I was getting her to ask, well, why are you here? Like, what do you want, or what are you trying to tell me?
What's the problem?
Yeah,
ultimately.
And the really cool thing with my client today was, she just laughed and she goes, "Oh my God!" And I was like, "What?" And she goes, "She is here to tell me that I don't need to worry about what other people think of me." And I was like, "Isn't that cool?" You know. So I went through the process, and like, true typical Sky style, I kind of threw in the deep end. And I'm like, we're going to do the hardest one first because that's what we do. And I went through all the negative traits that she was triggered by, and then the positive ones as well, and stuff like that. And I went through them all, and I got her to sort of recognize and all of that sort of stuff. And like, I did the integration process, and she goes, "Oh, fuck, I get it." She goes, "It's me." And I went, "Yeah, welcome to the party."
I don't know if we went into this last episode properly, but it may or may not be your fault, but it's always you, and it is always your responsibility.
Yeah, what you do with it is your responsibility.
But that's that ability to have gratitude is that, well, I did this, I felt that, I went through this. That's what you're grateful for.
So, and she goes, "Sky, when you did my personal breakthrough," which is like a detailed personal history. So that's a process of like going through what the problem is. And it's like an intensive 2.5 hour, a lot of talking, a lot of questions, but we find what is going on, and then I find the root cause of why, why you do the things that you're doing. Like I'm fucking epic at patterns, right? Find the patterns, find the loops, all that sort of stuff. And she was like, "Sky, when you did my breakthrough and you said this person was my mirror," I was literally like, "Fuck you, she is not." And like that resistance was there. And then you've like come back to this today, like how, a few weeks down the track, once we've done some clearing and all that sort of stuff. And she's like, "I fucking get it. I can see how she is my mirror. I could see why this person had shown up in my life." And I was just like, yay, that is fantastic.
So we were talking a little while ago about like the resistance to change, that ego getting you coming and going.
Yeah.
It's like, in case anyone's listening going, how come that conversation takes 2.5 hours? And even then, another 2 weeks to finally accept that's why, because this person doesn't want to accept that this is the thing, and it takes 2.5 hours of conversation to plant a seed deeply enough for it to be a thing over 2 weeks, so that you can have that conversation and she can, I fucking get it.
Yeah.
God damn it, I get it.
Well, that's it. The conversation is like taking a deep dive into the history. So like childhood, family, model.
How did you get here?
Yeah, how did you get here essentially? And then, for me, because I do a lot of work with the unconscious, a lot of it was clearing. So clearing the blocks of negative emotions that were still within the body, clearing some of the negative and limiting beliefs that she had about herself, before we even attempted to, as you said, go into that, because of that resistance was there when she was like, fuck God, like she's not my mirror, like fuck you, so I had to clear enough of her so she could see enough of her confidence to be open enough to go, oh, I get it. Like, and that's essentially why I do the process I do. Because it takes that time, as you said, to plant that seed, to educate, to inform about, hey, this is what's happening, this is why it's happening. You can go away and think about that and come back and we'll start this process of removing it.
Like that, like we're making the point about like 2.5 hour conversation, and that comes to fruition 2 weeks. Like I've planted seeds in people that took 2.5, 3 years. Right. Like I'm like, oh yeah, no, that made sense. And then I heard your voice and you saying, see, I fucking told you. It's like, I've never said that to anyone.
No.
But it's like that's what they sort of internalize, is like, this is why we say what we say. It's like, it takes what it takes to get you to the place where you're like, oh, okay, I get it now. Because sometimes the walls are that thick, the shell's that tough, the neurology is that deeply set in, consciously and subconsciously, that it just takes time.
That's it. As you said, you need to sort of plant that seed and educate, inform, change some of the neurology around, change some of the neuro pathways around, so they can start
Kick
to
him
see.
in the ass.
Kick him in the ass. No, so they can see some stuff slightly differently, and, so I said to her, like, at the end of the session, I'm like, you did really well. I'm so proud of you. I said, I'm sorry. Sorry I kicked you in the ass. I'm sorry I started with the hardest one first.
Sorry, not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry. And she's like, no, that's fine. I'm actually glad that you did, because I can actually really see. I said, awesome. So next time we catch up, which is in another fortnight, we're going to be going through, the next 2 shadow selves she had. And she's like, oh, yay. And I'm like, wow. Are you excited? And she's like, can you hear it in my voice? I'm like, I'm excited. But it's just, I get excited because you can literally see the person transform when they're just like, oh, fuck, like, I get it, and their whole world just changed and they just start operating completely differently.
It's such a complete perception shift that has its own new thoughts, new feelings, new behaviors behind it. Like you sort of talking about, like, I like to go with the hardest version of things first. That's why I asked a really, really hard question, like, who are you? Because then, like, they'll say some stuff like, I'm a dad, I'm a this, I'm a that. It's like, can you try that again, but without using external reference points to describe yourself? And they're like, no. And it's really hard. I'm like, this is why we ask, because you almost need that hard to counterbalance the hard they've got in their head. Crack that proverbial shell. Is that kind of your experience?
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of the times it's sort of like, I tend to start with like, well, what do you want? And they'll give me a whole bunch of stuff.
To not feel like this.
To not feel like this, that's it. Because I work a lot in emotion and feeling and, how to recognize within the body and stuff like that. So it's like, well, what do you want? Well, I don't want this. And I don't, like, they give me a whole bunch of stuff they don't want, right? I don't want this and I don't want that. I don't want to, I don't want to go into another narcissistic relationship. I want to be able to, like, I don't want to feel like this. And I'm like, cool, well, that's everything that you don't fucking want. Awesome. What do you do want? And they're like, well, I want to feel like this.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, cool. Well, what does that look like to you? And then it's like,
I don't know.
That's a really hard fucking question. And
see, I was going to say, my experience of most people, whether they're in this kind of conversation or not, the stark reality of recognizing that shitty isn't. No, I'll rephrase that. Not bad isn't the same as shitty. In the same way that not bad isn't the same as good.
Yeah.
Like it's like you've got to get people to a more neutral place to have sort of recognized, owned and cleared what shitty feels like to get them to a different place to be able to look a little bit further past that. Because trying to go from one end of the spectrum to the other is...
too much of a jump.
Yeah, rough.
Rough, right?
Yeah.
I know. And especially...
Was that enough understatement, you reckon?
All right. Enough, yeah, totally. And I did an expanded conscious circle with an amazing psychic reader, tarot reader, a few weeks ago. Unfortunately, I had to miss a couple of her sessions, but she was like literally talking about the similar thing. It was just like a lot of people are so, they know what shitty is, they know what they feel like, and all this sort of stuff. But to get them to, because it was we're talking like an abundance and joy and love. To get them to feel things like abundance and joy, like from feeling shitty, like that's like fucking down here, and like joy is all up here, that they actually don't have any idea of what that actually really feels like.
They just know what it feels to have the relief of feeling shitty.
Yeah.
But that's just not the same as
that's it. So it's like, moving them to a space of, like neutral.
Yeah.
So, and getting them to, be there and be present there, and then, transcend again.
I mean, I'd argue that things like antidepressants, that's actually what they're for. They're a tool by which to minimize or at least mitigate the shittiness to get you to that neutral zone.
Yeah.
But if you spend too much time in that neutral zone, that's when you start to notice that you feel like a zombie, because we haven't practiced putting in steps to negate the shitty things and let yourself come out of it to sort of progress beyond normal. Sorry, not normal, neutral.
Neutral.
Yeah, like that grey miasma of zombie life.
Right.
I mean, that's something as complicated as antidepressants. Like, people just have this stuff as their life, whether they're depressed or not. It's just like there's this polarity of feeling state that when you're not present with this stuff, when you're not self-aware enough about that feeling state, it just becomes a gentle humdrum beige of life. Was that harsh enough, you think?
All I can think of is beige now.
Yeah. I hope that makes sense in the, like, even if you do or don't have depression, even if you don't do or don't have anxiety, it's like your ability to boring up your life by ignoring
or busy.
what you that too, Netflix and booze or whatever crutch people tend to use to sort of not be present with themselves and what that feels like and what they think and what that actually plays out like in their life.
Yeah, that's it. I believe that, like, as you said, like, whether depressed or not, whether on medication or not, 90-something% of the population are conditioned to think that beige neutral, that is what life is. And they completely lose the ability to have joy. And, that is inner child talk.
Or at least not artificially stimulated joy.
Right. And to be present with what's happening around them and find the joy in that.
Or within them.
Right?
Especially anyway.
And, and I, like, even for me, I know when, like, I started my own journey, fucking, how old am I now? Like, nearly
21.
21, totally 21.
29.
Like 15 years ago this year. Yeah, fuck. So, I was diagnosed with PTSD at 21, so you guys can do the maths about how old I am this year.
Don't post that number. It's just rude.
I don't mind. But one of the things that I like, you know, like when you say like, well, who do you want to be or what do you want? One of the things that I didn't want, because, you know, we always give what we don't fucking want, right? Is like, I didn't want that.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't want the, you know, just settle and, you know, be miserable or beige or meh.
This is me for 50 years. Cool.
Yeah, right. And I was just like, I want to actually enjoy my life. I want to thrive. I want to have fun. I want to be happy. I want to be able to, you know, not let the things that happened to me in my past dictate what happens to me in my future, you know, and, you know, the whole like, well, I was traumatized, so this is just my life now. Well, you know, like as you said, like what happened to you was not your fault, but it's your responsibility what you do with it.
Yeah.
And I chose to do something different.
Yeah.
And here we are today.
I was about to say, I think that the more the research comes out, the neuroscience of it is that to get where you really want to go, you kind of need both.
Right.
You need that drive to not want to let yourself step back into that mess. Yep, that'll do.
Yeah.
But you also need enough incentive to continue to step forward as well.
Right.
And without both of those things, one isn't enough to get you where you want to be, and the other one isn't enough
to keep you going.
Because, you know, eventually we'll talk about the difference between motivation and discipline and all this sort of stuff.
Right. Or like, you know, and I'll just leave you with this because this is super cool and I'm like, this is the shit I do. You know, we talk about like away energy and toward energy.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, like I said, when I ask like, what do you want? A lot of people will give you what you don't want. So, you know, what you don't want is essentially away energy, right?
Yep.
So, like as you said, that is your motivation, that is your driving force. You know, so, but if you have too much of that away energy, that driving, you know, what will happen is you will get, and this is where a lot of self-sabotage loop comes in, you will get to almost where you want to go. And like, I'm going to use weight loss as an example because people can visualize.
It's a phenomenal example.
Right? So let's say, for example, you want to lose 20 kilos. All right, sweet. And you are like, why don't you want to do that? I don't want to be this. I don't want to be that. I don't want to be, you know, whatever like internal representation you have around body weight is your thing. So you have so much motivation and drive because you're thinking of all the things that you don't want, right? Yeah. But you get to like 15 kilos and all of a sudden that motivation and drive.
Yeah, you're almost there. You can take the foot off the pedal,
right,
so to speak.
It kind of falters. And why is that? Is because you're no longer in that pain anymore.
Yeah.
So what will happen is your neurology will need to find that pain again to get itself going. So that's when you kind of fall off the bandwagon or, as you said, take your foot off the pedal and all of a sudden you've put, you know, you've lost 15 and you've put 20 kilos back on and all of a sudden that pain's back and you've got that motivation drive. Can you see the loop? You know, so when you have then that toward energy of like, well, I'm doing this because I want this, not I'm doing this because I don't want that. That is your continual drive forward. But if you have 100% of toward energy, you lose your motivation because
you can't live at that level forever because you run out of serotonin.
Right, exactly.
No one's gut's that good.
So you kind of need like a, you know, 70, like, you know, 30-70, you know, a little bit of like the away energy to like, that's your fire starter.
Yeah.
And then the 70% of like your continual driving force because that's going to keep you going.
Being present with the energy that or the emotional state that you intend to have.
Yeah, I think that was a way tangent off shadow. But
I'm about to make it worse.
But I was just like, oh.
So I like that as an analogy. I think we've talked about that before. Not on air, but, you know, we did. Old conversation wasn't recorded.
Yeah.
Your subconscious doesn't recognize the positive or negative association with what you're focusing on. And the irony is that because that's true, it's only your conscious mind that recognizes the good and bad of things.
Yeah.
So if you're constantly focusing on that version of yourself that is in pain, it's like you're trying to walk forwards while constantly looking backwards.
It's like putting your foot on the gas and the brake at the same time and wondering why you're not fucking going anywhere.
I reckon it goes even further than that. So definitely that. But the fact that all you're doing is focusing on who you used to be, and because your subconscious doesn't recognize the positive or negative of that, that's what your subconscious is being determined as important, that version of you, which is where I would argue a lot of the self-sabotage really comes from. It focuses on, even though I feel shitty about that version of me, that's the bit that I've deemed important. And that's ultimately why we kind of end up going back there without an alternative version, which to recondition our subconscious to focus on.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's it. The brain doesn't like space, so
it abhors a vacuum.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, bringing it back to shadow, when you close the doors and barricade them all up on certain parts and those opposite ends of the spectrum, they over-exaggerate. That is why, because the brain doesn't like space. So it will automatically fill it. And, well, if you've shut off all this shit about yourself that you've deemed unworthy or bad or whatever else, well, it's going to go, well, I've got space now, and the only way I can fill that space is to create more of this.
Yeah. Default operating mode.
Because this is what is important, right? You've just,
so we haven't got anything else to work with.
Right. You've just shut everything off. So this is what's important now. So we're going to make this 10 times bigger, to fill the space that's there. It's like when you self-sabotage, or when you have negative or limiting beliefs about yourself, and in my world, I clear them, and if we don't put something in its place, so like, if you've deemed that person that was, X, Y, Z weight and all this sort of stuff, you've created so much energy around that persona of yourself, that version of yourself, that the minute you go to change, because you haven't created a new version, or, or whatever that looks like, because both versions are you, when you haven't sort of going, okay, even love and accepted that version and going, well, this is who we're going to be transforming into, because we're integrating all of that sort of stuff, you are going to go back there because it doesn't like space. Well, and I can see that I'm doing hand gestures, and
there'll be some recordings up somewhere to see all this sort of elaborate Italian talking.
Funnily enough, I don't have Italian in me. But yeah, so...
Sorry, just reminded me of a bad joke. Some Italian dude walks up and said, "Would you like some?"
Fuck off. Yeah, because it doesn't like space, so it's automatically going to fill it with what was there previously, and
you could be argued that that's just what the ego does. It's like, I need to feel normal. I need to feel centered. And if the only way that happens is by looking back on who I was and staying there in terms of how I self-identify, regardless of what the physical body's done, it will fucking do it.
Exactly.
And you'll be frustrated when you go backwards and go, I'm fucking here again. And the real problem, I would argue, there is that then you've got evidence to suggest that you can only get so far before you end up backwards again. And that's like evidence for your ego to use against why you never want to try again, because you just hurt your own feelings about failing.
Yeah, and
you didn't fail, but your ego's kind of a dick.
Well, there's no such thing as failure, only feedback.
But that's when you're in that headspace. So that's what you're interpreting it as. It's like I couldn't do what I set out to do. Why would I try again? Yeah,
and like that's like a whole nother ego conversation of like shadow and, well, what part of you did you, deem unacceptable to be why you are, why you keep doing this cycle. Yeah. And 9 times out of 10, it comes back to self-worth. Just saying. So where did...
Is it ever not that?
Right. So where did you stuff your self-worth? Yeah. What back corner did you say, and what part did you say that you're not worth it, so therefore you're not going to try, or you're not going to do this, or you're not going to do that, or whatever, and live beige.
And in case it needs...
Beige is stuck in my head.
Yeah, you're welcome. In case it ever needs saying, you learnt that That wasn't how you were born.
No.
And it never, ever was. I don't give a shit who you are.
Yeah.
You didn't get born that way. You got taught that.
No person is born with shadow selves. No person is
And that's the
born.
point. And that's why shadow work is so valuable. It's because until you can recognize that you got taught this, you do not have the capacity to undo it. And that's why self-awareness and the steps to go into that depth, that proverbial miasma of blech in the back of your head, is so scary but so intensely valuable at the same time. Because the real you is buried in there, in filth that will be found.
Yeah, right. That's it.
And if you don't go digging, you will not find you.
Where else is the cool shit found? Like under the ground.
Yeah.
Crystals, gold.
Diamonds. Gold, all of the above. And that's what I mean. In filth that will be found. If you don't go digging, you do not find out the real you. How do you become more you without that?
Right.
How do you make that work for you? How does it serve you? How do you readapt and adjust your ego to incorporate that so that it serves you rather than shoots you in the foot with a beige bullet?
Beige is the thing, right? Well, with that being said, I think we've gone on a couple of wee tangents, which is like,
job description for us.
Job description for us, right? You're dealing with, Todd and Sky, who has ADHD. Life is tangent. So I reckon, if you like, let's call it for today, for this episode. And when we catch up again, we are going to dive more into shadow, more into tangent, but we're going to dive into, emotions, shadow traits. So like how to recognize those.
Sorry, not sorry. There's always more shadow. You're welcome, guys.
And what that means and how to start doing it. And like pretty much like shadow of emotional regulation and processing.
Done.
Wicked.
All right. In that case, be good. No bar fights.
If you can't be good, be nice. And no bar fights.
See you guys.
Bye.